So, hello everyone. Welcome to the second meeting of the second Israeli School on Biometrics. Today we're going to have two talks, and starting this meeting we're going to have always two talks. The first speaker of the day is Dr. Akavia, which is a member of the computer science department here at the University of Haifa. She obtained her PhD at MIT and did her postdoctoral research at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton, and then in Rutgers, and later on at Weizmann Institute of Science. She's a good friend, and she's an expert in cryptography and computer security. And it's a great pleasure to have her joining us today. Adi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is the sound all right? Okay. So I'm going to give an introduction to homomorphic encryption. And from the point of view of biometric, I want to give a bunch of applications.
Can you please raise your voice, please, or near to the microphone, please?
Microphone is as close as can be. It's next to my mouth.
Sorry.
I'm going to give a bunch of applications connecting the cryptographic tools that we're going to see to the realm of biometric authentication and identification. You're seeing the main screen, right? It's not the presenter's notes. Okay. I see a nod. Good. So first, cryptography deals with a lot of things. Primarily, it deals with an adversary. What can go wrong when somebody wants to go against you? But the focus of this talk is about privacy. And why do we care about privacy? There are a bunch of reasons. Some of them concern us as individuals. Say you post some really stupid video on Facebook when you are young, and then you apply to some job or college or insurance, and they see this stupid video that you posted and tell you, we don't want you here. That's annoying that, you have this trace of your old identity haunting you. But it could be even more criminal aspects or more serious things. For example, there's a lot of information on ourselves. It's available online. And if somebody wants to do an identity theft, they know a lot about us that really helps to impersonate us. Or sometimes criminal entities want to do extortion. They can maluse information available on individuals. So there's a bunch of concerns for us as individuals. There's also concerns for the society as a whole, because the minute there's so much information out there on each and every one of us, this allows to do some manipulations of big crowds. For example, there could be targeted ads that target particular types of personalities to sway them to buy something or to vote something or to change their behavior in some way that's targeted towards their likings and their personality. Just a few months ago, it was announced that fake news are one of the big threats on humanities. Again, fake news are possible because we live in these echo chambers where there's so much known about us and how we can be approached so that we'll believe what is being told to us. And this could be a serious threat to civil liberty, to freedom, etc. So there's a lot of aspects by which privacy is important for us. And when we speak on biometric information, it's even more important because the biometric data, it really identifies us of who we are. We can't just change it. It's not like a passport that you can switch password and throw the old one away. If it's a voice or fingerprint or a face or iris, etc., it's something that goes with us from cradle to grave. Within professional language, you call it non-revocable. It's unique identifiable, it's non-revocable. And we don't even have a choice always whether it will be collected or not. In many cities in the world, there are, for example, surveillance cameras scattered all throughout, collecting data from passerbys. And most of it, from good intentions. Some cities want to stop crime. They want to identify if there's a crime happening, and that's their intended use of the camera. But once this information is collected, it has to be held somewhere in some database. It holds this biometric information. And once it's held, it can be misused, either by the person, the entity who's collecting the data to begin with, or by some outsider who happens to be able to breach into this database. This is all very risky, and it's very important to protect this biometric templates about this data that's collected in as strong protection as possible. There's just a few links to recent and less recent newspaper articles talking about dangers in biometric collected data. So from the cryptography point of view, I want to focus on 3 goals. First, we want to protect the data. We want the biometric data to be encrypted at all time, not just when we transmit it, when we communicate it from one place or the other, and not just when we safeguard it in some database at rest, but also when we use it. When we use it for authentication or for the identification, I don't want the templates to be leaked at any point. I want them to be encrypted at all times. Another goal is the control of access. And once we have this biometric data, we want to control that only authorized entities will be able to access this, to encrypt the data and see either the templates themselves or the results of the computation. And one last goal that I'm going to touch as time permits is about the checks and balances. You know, often it's wise not to give too much power to a single entity, because power has a tendency to corrupt. And if only a single power has full control on everything, that could be risky. So it's common to use these checks and balances where you distribute power so that no single entity can control, for example, the access to the biometric data. So for our purposes, you could think, for example, that if you want to access the template to the biometric database, you'll need consent from both, I don't know, maybe a police department and a court. And only with the consent of 2 such entities, you'll be able to get the authorization. And this, again, is something that we have technological means that can assist us in enforcing it, in making it a technological designs that forces the requirement to have consent from few different entities. And to achieve these goals, there are really a bunch of advanced cryptographic tools that can help us. And I'm going to touch primarily on the first one, on fully homomorphic encryption, and a bit also on the latter two, secret sharing and secure computation, to introduce you to how these tools are and what they can give you. So homomorphic encryption, what it will give us is the data protection also in use, not just when it's in rest or in transit, and the access control. And you know, some of it's not the Winter School is not just for people in cryptography; it's for a general audience in computer science. Let me just start from really the basics: the encryption one-on-one. In all encryption is what we call symmetric encryption. In symmetric encryption, you know, you have a message, and you have a secret key that it uses both to encrypt a message. Encrypt, you can think of it as like putting the message in a locked box. So it's there, but nobody can see it. And you use the same secret key to decrypt the box. We call it the ciphertext. This is the box that holds the message. And to open the box, this is a decryption. We need the secret key both to lock the message in the box and to open the box to reveal the message. So if you have a secret key, you can encrypt and you can decrypt. And if you don't have the secret key, you can do neither. And as you know, it's something very old, even in the old ages, like, you know, of Caesar's ciphers, that those are to change a message to something that's less easily legible. This is one example where you have the key says that you are going to shift each letter by +1. So U goes to the next letter, which is V, and O goes to the next letter, which is B. And instead of saying U of H rocks, you get this thing that's hard to read at the first sight. Now we know today that this is not too secure. There are all kinds of things like the frequencies of letters, that if you see a long text and you know, for example, in English that E is highly frequent, so I can see from the letters appearing which is most frequent and then guess that this is a match to E. And with a bunch of processes like this can be fairly easily decrypted without knowing, broken without knowing the secret key with today's knowledge. But symmetric encryption has also modern variants. For example, the AES cipher is widely used symmetric ciphertext, symmetric cipher. Now, this is all good, but if we want to do e-commerce, if we want to buy something for a great online retailer, say Amazon, we can't really have a secret key that we use to decrypt, because this secret key somehow has to be decided upon. Now, if you're a general in an army and you have a soldier and you are sending far away, you can meet, discuss, decide on the key, and then go to your separate ways. But I am not going to meet Amazon in person. I guess none of you is going to meet Amazon. So how do we decide on a secret key? And to the rescue comes a different type of encryption we call asymmetric or public key encryption. And here again, the basic operation is to encrypt and to decrypt, but now there's two separate keys for doing them. For encryption, we need something that's called the public key. The public key has no secret information to it. It doesn't help you decrypt at all. Everyone can know it. You can just post it on your website and there's no security issue. So when I go to the Amazon website, I can see the public key and then encrypt the message, say my credit card number. Now to decrypt, you need another key. This is called the secret key, and this you have to maintain secret if you want the encryption to be secure. So this really is critical to all e-commerce that we know. And now when you think of decryption, we picture it as a closed box that we lock the message inside. And when we think of it like that, you know, we think like all we can do is put it in a box or open the box, and that's it. But in actuality, when you dig down the encryption schemes that we use, sometimes you actually can do more. So let me give you a simple example with what's the encryption known as textbook RSA. I want to show you how I can do something with the ciphertext that is not just decrypting them, but also computing on the underlying message. So let's see how encryption looks with RSA. I have a secret key, which is, skip here. I have a public key, which is n, the modulus n, and some exponent e. And to encrypt a message m, I'm going to raise m to the power of e and take the remainder modulo n. To decrypt, I need to do the inverse operation to take the eth root of the ciphertext. Now, if we were working over real numbers, taking roots is fairly easy. We know how to do it. But over a finite field, when its modular composite, which is the product of two large primes, it's done with RSA, we don't know an efficient algorithm that achieves this. So when we compute this m to the e mod n and show just the outcome of this computation, this is like putting the message in a box because it's inefficient to compute the root and find m, unless you have the secret key, which makes it efficient. Now, once we have this m locked in a box, suppose we have these two ciphertexts, this M1 encrypted, which is M1 to the E, and M2 encrypted, which is M2 to the E. And now, suppose I want to multiply these two ciphertexts. You know, the ciphertexts are just integers. I can do a bunch of operations with them. Let's see what happens if we multiply them. So I take the encryption of M1 and I multiply it with the integer that is the encryption of M2. So this is m1 to the e, and I multiply by m2 to the e. And when two numbers have the same exponent, I can open these parentheses and write it as m times m1 times m2 raised to the power of e. But this is exactly what I will receive if I compute the encryption of m1 times m2. So basically, I have one ciphertext for m1 and one ciphertext for m2. I can multiply them together and get a new ciphertext that when I decrypt, I get the product of the messages. So I managed to compute something, some function of these messages, their product, without knowing the messages. All I have is ciphertext, a ciphertext for one, ciphertext for the other. I manipulate those ciphertexts and get a ciphertext that upon decryption will give me the function computed on these messages. This is interesting. We call it homomorphic multiplication. We are allowed to do multiplication where the data is encrypted, but it's not entirely clear how useful a product is. What does it give me? What can I compute if I can compute such products? If I could compute additions rather than multiplications, it's easier to think of applications. For example, if I want to compute an average of some numbers, this is just summing up values. So if I can sum up the values even though they are encrypted, it could be useful. For example, I could use it to tally elections. Suppose when you vote yes for some proposal, you encrypt 1, and then vote no, you encrypt 0. If I can somehow get a ciphertext that encrypts the sum of all these values, I will know how many votes of yes, were given. Now, this I don't know how to do with RSA, as I showed you. I know how to get the ciphertext encrypting the product of the message, but not their sums. But I can tweak the encryption scheme to allow computing additive homomorphism, to compute the sum of the messages when given only the ciphertext. So let's look at how this looks like. Let's think of a different encryption scheme. Now, to encrypt a message M using some randomness R, I'm going to output R to the E times some constant C to the power of M, and all this modulo M N. So now, if I have two ciphertexts of this new encryption, let's see what happens if I multiply them. So I have the encryption of M1, which is R1 to the E times C to the M1, and I have the encryption of M2, which is R2 to the E times C to the M2. If I multiply them together, I can shift things around. So first I have this R1 times R2 to the E, and then this base C times M1 plus the M2. And this is exactly what I would get if I'd encrypt the sum of the messages M1 plus M2 under the randomness R1 times R2. So when I'm given two ciphertexts, I can multiply them, and I'm getting a new integer that if I apply decryption on this integer, I will get the sum of the messages. And I will show it here only for 2 messages, but I can do the same for n messages, sum them all up, and then get things like the average or tally of elections, etc. So here, before, the product of 2 ciphertexts gave me an encryption of the product of the messages, and now I was able to get an encryption of the sum of the messages. We can do sums or products, but the constructions that I showed you do not do both. Now, if I want to do more complex computations, not just average, I really need both. Just doing multiplying on and on and on, or just summing on and on and on is not enough to do very complex operations. And fully homomorphic encryption, this is exactly what it provides us. This is an encryption scheme that supports homomorphic computation of both sums and products. So it means that if I know the public key, and ciphertext. A ciphertext encrypting some message M1 and a ciphertext encrypting another message M2. I can manipulate the ciphertext to produce new ciphertexts. I'm calling them ciphertext add and ciphertext mold. And the property that the FHE guarantees is that if I decrypt them, if I decrypt the ciphertext, the first ciphertext, I get the sum of the message. And if I decrypt the other one, I get the product of the messages. Now this, I show you here just one sum and one product, but in general, I can repeat these operations and do as many sums and products as I want. And this really gives me the ability to compute over the encrypted functions, while I only have ciphertext, to be able to compute any function that I want of the underlying plain text. And the reason is that if I can compute sums and products, I can compute polynomials, and polynomials approximate any functions. We know that from calculus 1. Or in other words, the operations, the plus and the product and the summation are true complete set of operations, like XOR and AND, or NOT and 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 OR. So once I can compute these basic operations, I can aggregate these operations to compute any function that I want. So how is this related to biometric? So let's suppose we encrypt with FHE, with fully homomorphic encryption, the templates or the samples or both. What can we do? What can we compute when these values are encrypted? So let's just think of biometric authentication. We call it authentication. I have one template and one old template was registered before during some enrollment process, and one new sample, and I want to check whether they match to each other. And how I check that? It's usually the sum distance metric. And I compute the distance from the old template, from the new sample, and if the distance is sufficiently small, I'm saying, yes, this is a match. What type of distances are used? So one example is the Euclidean distance. Here, I'm not taking the square roots, I'm calling the square Euclidean distance. How does it look? If X is a template and Y is a new sample, they both are a vector of values. I just want to look at the difference on each coordinate. I raise it to the power of 2, and I sum all these things. Now, suppose I have the template encrypted and the sample encrypted. Then I still am able to compute, if they're encrypted with the homomorphic encryption, I'm still able to manipulate the ciphertext so that I get a result ciphertext that does all these operations. This is raised to the power of 2 with just product, and taking difference or summation is just with homomorphic addition. And I can compute all these things even if I never see the information itself, the template or the sample in clear text. I can do this computation and receive a ciphertext that upon decryption would give me the distance between the template and the sample. And this was proposed in a work by Gomez Barreiro et al. A few years ago for the use of biometric authentication. Another example is computing inner products. Euclidean distance, just one type of similarity or distance measure. Inner product is another type. How does it look? X and Y are vectors, and the inner product just multiplying each coordinates and summing up these values. Now, suppose X and Y are an encrypted template and encrypted sample. Homomorphic encryption allows me to compute the ciphertext whose decryption would give me this value. And this was used by Morampundi et al. Again, for secure authentication, this time with the iris biometric. And there are many other examples. I want to give just one last example with regards to biometric identification. Identification is a harder problem than authentication, because now we're not just giving one template and one sample and want to compute a score. Instead, there's a big database of many templates and one query, which is a sample that we're searching, and we want to know whether the query matches the database. or to which database entries it's a match. And this is a heavier computation. I cannot just write the formula in a one-liner like I did in the previous slides, but still we showed in the work with my co-authors Feldman and Shaul that we can compute this secure search over database and query that are encrypted with homomorphic encryption. And one application of this search is for biometric identification. So just to show how this would look like, if I have, when I acquire the biometric templates, I would encrypt them in fully homomorphic encryption and store them in the database on the cloud. I use this picture of putting the templates in this little box to indicate that they're encrypted, so they're hidden. Nobody actually sees what they are, not even the cloud who's holding them. And then when you have a sample, first sample, you can again encrypt it and send to the cloud if you want to hide even the query that you have. And the cloud, the server, would run some more complex algorithm that manipulates all those ciphertexts, multiplies them and adds them and does all kinds of manipulations to produce at the end the result ciphertext, which would be an encrypted index, an encrypted value for the matches, where the query matches the database. So this all, I showed you how we can use a fully homomorphic encryption to keep the biometric template database completely encrypted, even while we use it for the classical applications, for the classical computations used for biometric, for authentication and for identification. And this gives us data protection and also the access control, because the result ciphertext that we get is encrypted. So just to know the answer or just to look in clear text at some value in the database or the sample, somebody has to give you the secret key or somebody has to decrypt for you. So there's a decision point every time whether you're authorized or not to see the value. So this is just what I just said. So from our three goals, fully homomorphic encryptions allows us to get the data protection at use and the access control, but it doesn't really help us with these checks and balances. As we presented it now, to see the results, someone has to hold the secret key and to decrypt for authorized entities. And this someone has a lot of power, because he can he or she can choose to decrypt or not to decrypt. So how do we add checks and balances to this playground? And the key idea would be that we don't want the secret key to be held by just one entity. We want to somehow distribute not the secret key, but what you call shares of the secret key, kind of tiny parts of the secret key between multiple entities, so that none of them can be the deciding point alone. They need to collaborate, to have consent from multiple entities in order to actually access the data. And I will discuss with you now how we can achieve this with cryptographic tools that are known as secret sharing and secure multi-party computation. So let's start with secret sharing. This is a fairly old tool, starting with Shamir secret sharing at the 70s. And to start with really a simple example, let's think what's known as 2 out of 2 secret sharing. So suppose you have some secret. Here the secret is this picture. Suppose it is a secret picture, and I want to hide it. I can split it in a sense into 2 pictures that each of them reveals nothing. What would these pictures look like? So the left one, I just put here random noise. I picked in each pixel, whether it be 0 or 1. So, sorry. Just a second. sorry. Okay, so I'm going, the first picture, just random pixels of 0 and 1. And the next one is the XOR of the real picture with the one to the left. Now, when you look at these pictures, suppose we give them the left one to one entity and the right one to another entity, then none of them knows anything about the original picture. Each of these left and right things look just like random gibberish. But if they collaborate and they join their shares, then they can reconstruct the given picture. They can just add their shares and get the picture that they want. Now, this is called 2 out of 2 because I need the 2 shares to construct the secret. Sometimes you want higher flexibility because here, suppose just one of the entities that hold the picture is sick or out of contact, then we're doomed. We cannot reconstruct the picture. So we want something that's with more flexibility. We want something that's known as T out of N secret sharing, which means that we can take the secret and share it among N entities so that any T of them would suffice to reconstruct the secret. So we don't need all of them to be available. T of them suffice. But any less than T minus 1 or less, there's nothing about the secret. And this can be achieved using elegant mathematics of polynomial. And let me just give you a hint of how it's done. We all know that through 2 points, only a single line goes. Or if we have the equation of a line, if you know 2 points on that line, you can calculate the equation for the line. You can calculate its slope and its intercept with the y-axis. And the same goes for higher degree polynomial. If you have degree 2 polynomial, if you have 3 points on that line, you can compute its intercept with the y-axis. And in general, if you have degree t minus 1 polynomial, once you have t points on that line, you can compute the intercept. So the idea is to pick up a random polynomial of degree t. It's random except for one constraint. The constraint is the intercept with the y-axis is going to be the secret value. All other values of the polynomial are just random. And now the shares that I'm going to distribute are just the evaluation of this polynomial over various points. Party 1, entity 1, we get the valuation of this polynomial on point 1. Value 2 on point 2, etc. And given these points, each individual or each subset, sufficiently small subset of individual, there's nothing. But once T of them collaborate, they can retrieve the secret. Now, how is it useful for us? So let's first think of a simple use that I will later explain how to get to be even stronger in terms of the security that's achieved. So the simple idea is to I remind you that the problem that we had was that the secret share was this 1 point of power. The person holding the secret share could do a lot of things. He could decide who can see a template, who can see a result, and who's not. So the idea is that we will not let anyone hold the secret share. Instead, the secret key, sorry. Instead, we will apply this sharing algorithm to distribute shares of the secret key among multiple parties. And now when they want to decrypt some ciphertext, say the result of biometric identification, they need to decide together that this decryption is authorized. And how can they decrypt? So one way to do it is that they come up together, they join their shares of the secret key to reconstruct the secret key, and then they can use this key to decrypt. So this gives a point of decision that they have to all agree that they need to decrypt, and then they can do it. The reason I call it the first try and that I don't really like this as a final solution is that in terms of the timing, they have one point of decision, and then once they construct the secret key, they have it, and they can use it again and again and again, maybe without the consent of other parties the next time. And this is something we do not like as cryptographers. We don't want the secret key to be exposed after one use. We want every time that you want to decide whether or not to decrypt, that you'll have to get the consent of sufficiently many authorized parties. So better way to do it is to compute the result of the decryption, but while never reconstructing the secret key. So you'll never expose the secret key. So every time you want to decrypt, you have to acquire again the consent from sufficiently many entities. And this can be done by something that we call secure computation or secure multi-party computation. And in essence, what secure computation does is that it enables n parties, they are entities holding the shares of the secret key, where each holds some secret input, in our case, these are the shares. It enables them to jointly perform a computation on the union of their secret inputs without revealing any information on the other participants' input, except, of course, what can be efficiently inferred from the output itself. So pictorially, how this would look, at an offline phase, we're going to share this secret share, the secret key, between n parties. So one party will get the share S1 and another share S2, etc. These are, here we have 4 parties, each has a share of the secret key. And now when there's a secret key that they want to decrypt, they need to communicate together in order to produce the result ciphertext. There is the result value. So they will produce an output Y, which is the decryption of the ciphertext under a key, which is the reconstruction of their share. But they will do so while never revealing the secret key itself. So nothing is going to be revealed except those private inputs. And to explain in more depth how this is done would require more time that we have allocated for this lecture, but I added a link here to a really easy to read book that explains the core idea of secure computations. So I don't recall if I have 45 or 60 minutes, so so in the time that I've allocated, or if you know how much time?
You have 60 minutes and then 15 minutes for Q&A.
Perfect, good. So in the allocated time, I want to come back to the topic of fully homomorphic encryption and give a deeper view of how we construct an encryption scheme that supports both addition and multiplication homomorphically. What we saw so far supported either addition or multiplication, but not both. And for the application that we see, we do need both. So I want to show you a simple construction. It's not really the construction that we use in practice because it's not very efficient in terms of the parameters and the time it takes to encrypt and to compute. But it's the easiest one to explain. So this is the one I want to show you. And this is a scheme by Jain, Levy, Van Dyck, and Venkatranathan of FHE over the integers. And the slides I'm going to show, I'm going to build on slides of Menelo and Venkatranathan. So to explain the encryption scheme, I need to tell you how we encrypt, how we decrypt, and how we compute homomorphic addition and multiplication. This would be, I will give you the secret key version of the scheme. So I have the same secret key for encryption and for decryption. And the secret key is just going to be some number. Let's call it P. And I'm going to insist that it's an odd number and it will be a large number. And here I draw on the bottom of the slide the multiples of P. So I have 0 and P and 2 P's, etc. Now, when I want to decrypt a bit, this is a scheme that only supports messages that are bits. To encrypt a bit, what I'm going to do is 2 steps. First, I'm going to pick a large number, a large multiple of P. So I'm going to pick some large integer Q and compute Q times P. So suppose for the pictorially that Q is 2, then I have this pink dot here, 2P. Now I'm going to add what's been called the noise. I'm going to pick a small number, r, and I will compute 2r so that it's an even integer, and I will add to it my secret bit, b. So now I have 2r plus b. This would be even if b is 0, and it will be odd if b is 1. And I'm going to sum these two parts together. So the ciphertext is just going to be q times p plus 2r plus b. And pictorially, this is where the pink dot is now located. This is some integer that's close to a multiple of p, but not on a multiple of p. And the distance from the multiple of p is going to be even if b is 0, and 1 if b is, and going to be odd if b is 1. Now, to decrypt, this is exactly what we're going to use. We're going to take this ciphertext and first reduce it modulo p. So we drop all the multiples of p, and now it will be something that's close to 0 from either side of it. So basically, we are going to ignore the multiple of p and just look at the distance to the closest multiple of p. And now we're going to decide if this distance is even. We'll say that the input that was encrypted is 0, and if it's odd, we say that it's 1. So this is the secret key and the encryption and decryption. And now I want to show you how I'm going to compute homomorphic addition and homomorphic multiplication. And in essence, I'm just going to sum ciphertexts and to multiply them. And what I want to show you is that what the intended operation also occurs on the underlying message. So let's see how it looks. Before, I wanted to just a word of caution. When we define encryption schemes, of course, we need it to be secure. We can define many mathematical operations that are homomorphic, but they are not secure. And here in the security, this noise that we added, the fact that I'm not on a multiple of p, but just aside from it, is really critical for security. If the encryption would give me a clear multiples of p with no noise, then I could find the secret key using really old algorithm. The Euclid's greatest common divisor algorithm would give me the secret key p. So this noise is really critical. And this is not a phenomenon that occurs only with this particular encryption scheme. In all the fully homomorphic encryption schemes that we know of, noise plays an important factor. So this gives the hint, a feeling of how and why it happens. When there's noise, we don't know how to extend this greatest common divisor algorithm to solve this problem. We don't know of any polynomial time to solve this problem, and that's why it's presumably secure. Okay, so now I want to show you how I compute homomorphic addition. Addition, we are working with bits here. So the operations that I want to discuss are Boolean algebra, addition modulo 2 and multiplication modulo 2. When I add 2 bits modulo 2, I'm getting 0 if both are 0 or both are 1, and I get 1 otherwise. This is essentially how we define the XOR operation. XOR gives me 1 if the inputs are different, and 0 if they are equal. So let's see what happens when I just sum up two ciphertexts. I have a ciphertext C1, which is computed by taking some random values, Q1 and R1, and applying that to the encryption formula. And a ciphertext C2, which is for similar format, but with Q2 and R2, and of course, these messages are different, it's B1, B2. And now let's add them. Let's just compute this. C1 is an integer, C2 is an integer. Let's look what happens if we take the sum of these integers. When I sum up these formulas, I have some terms that are multiplied by p. I write them here as Q1 plus Q2. And I have some terms that are multiplied by 2. I write them here in the middle. This is R1 plus R2. And I have some terms that are not multiplied by anything. If you look at this equation, the 3 terms that are not multiplied by neither 2 nor p are just this B1 plus B2. So the sum of these ciphertexts is this form. And what happens when I apply the decryption algorithm in it? Recall the decryption just dropped off all the multiples of p. So the first term, the p times something drops off. And what remains is something that is even plus this b1 plus b2. And then I decide with the bit, if it's 0 and 1, according to the question of whether this value, the 2 times the sum of the r's plus the sum of the bits is even or odd. And when will it be odd? To be odd if just one of the two be, either B1 is 0 and B2 are 1, or vice versa. It'd be even if both are 0 or both are 1. So when I look at the least significant bit of this remainder after I take the modulo P, this would be exactly the XOR of the B1 and B2 as desired. So this shows us how I can manipulate ciphertext without knowing the secret key, without knowing the messages, and get a new ciphertext whose decryption would give me the sum of the original messages. What about multiplications? Let's try to do the same trick again. We have the same C1 and C2. Let's now multiply these integers. Now what I get again has some terms that are a product of P. I bunched them up in the first term here. It has some terms that are that are multiplied by 2. I bunch them up in the second term here. And I have some terms that are not a product of neither 2 nor a P. And these are, if you look at the equations, these are going to be just B1 times B2. And when I decrypt these values, I drop all these multiples of P. I'm reminded with something, which remains something that's an even number plus this B1 times B2. So if I look at the least significant bit of this number, it's just this B1 times B2, or the end of these 2 bits. So I see that the product of the 2 ciphertexts decrypts to the product of the messages. So I can do homomorphic addition and homomorphic multiplication. Now I'm not really done here, because if you see what happens, when I did one operations, that was fine. One addition, homomorphic addition, one homomorphic multiplication, but something does change. Every time I did an operation that's what we call the noise, our distance from the nearest multiple of P grew. It grows and grows and grows with every operation we did. By how much? When we just added 2 ciphertexts, it essentially doubled. I have here 2 R1 plus R2, so it's twice the size it was before. When I multiply, it's higher. I have here the noise is 2 times R1 times R2 plus additional terms. So essentially the noise is raised by the power of 2. And each operation I do, it grows and grows and grows. And this is a problem. Now, why is the problem? Look at this picture below. I started with 34 as a multiple of P. In this example, P is 17. But when I did more and more computations, the noise grew and grew and grew. And now when I reduce the ciphertext, this integer modulo P, instead of getting the noise to be 14, which is the distance I went from 34 to 20, I'm going to just say that the distance is 3, because now the nearest multiple of 17 is 17 itself, no longer 34. Now, why is this problematic? Recall that I decide if the bit that's encrypted is 0 or 1 according to whether the noise is even or odd. But the real noise, the 14, what I wanted, is even. But the noise that I'm going to come up with, the 3, is odd. So now when I decrypt, if the noise is too high, then the value that I'm going to decrypt to is just going to be false. It's not the correct value. So when I do the computation, I cannot allow the noise to grow too much. How much can it grow? Well, as long as it's below P over 2, then when I go to the nearest multiple of P, I'm still at the original multiple, and I'm fine. But once it grows beyond P over 2, then I have a problem. So what does it give us for now? I'll show how to advance further in a minute. For now, we have a construction that we call somewhat homomorphic encryption, because it allows us to do homomorphic multiplication and homomorphic addition, but not unlimitedly. I have a limit. I can do many additions because the noise grows slowly, and I can do few multiplications because the noise grows very fast. But what if I want to do more? What if I want to compute something that has many computations and many multiplications, some deep computations, say deep neural networks, where I have many levels of multiplications? So here comes one key idea in fully homomorphic encryption, which is the original blueprint of Gentry, who was the first one who gave a construction of fully homomorphic encryption. And this is called bootstrapping. And the idea is like that. Think of it as if we have this budget of noise. When we encrypt, we have a ciphertext with little noise. So I have here this meter that counts how much noise I have. It's not zero because we have to have some noise for security, but it's a small noise. Now, if we reach this point up here when noise is p/2, then we are done. We will get wrong decryption. We're not allowed to pass beyond this point. So we have to maintain the noise that will be no higher than this top point. And when we do homomorphic summations and multiplication, the noise grows and grows and grows. And the bootstrapping idea is the bootstrapping is this computation that reduces the noise. So you can think of it pictorially as this opening, an opening in this bottle is filled with more and more and more noise, so that when we run this bootstrapping operation, we just reduce the noise somehow to some fixed level. You see this opening at the side is going to stay the same fixed level, the same fixed high all the time. And now we can do again addition and multiplication homomorphically, and noise grows and grows and grows. And when it gets to the risky point, we can again open this point to the side and do this bootstrapping, this noise reduction operation to reduce the noise. And this noise reduction ability allows us to go on and on forever, because we can do many additions and few multiplications, then reduce the noise and repeat and do more and more and more indefinitely. So we can compute over encrypted data whatever we can compute over Q-Lattice data, any polynomial time computation. So how do we do this magic? How do we do this noise reduction? I will give you at least the gist of the idea. It's a very clever idea. So the first observation is that, if we had the secret key, we could reduce noise, because recall when I decrypt, what do I do when I decrypt? I compute the noise, and then by parity, even an odd, I decide what the value is. So decryption really eliminates the noise altogether. Now, when I do the homomorphic computation, I don't have the secret key, so I cannot use decryption. So this kind of is the intuitive way, how is it useful? But the clever idea is that although I cannot use decryption in the clear because I don't have the secret key, I can compute decryption homomorphically. So what do I mean? I can't provide a secret key to a person whom I want to protect the privacy of the data against, but I can give an encryption of the secret key. So a ciphertext whose decryption would give the secret key. This, just as a side remark said, requires some extra property from the encryption scheme that we call circular security, which is a question. It's researched how we can achieve this property and prove it from other properties. But for our purposes in this talk, suppose when I give the encryption of the secret key, it doesn't give the adversary any information. It doesn't know anything. It doesn't give any other power. This is what's called the circular security. Now, what can I do if I have this encryption? So the decryption, it's just some operation. I can write as an arithmetic circuit or as a polynomial. It's just some algorithm that does multiplications and additions. Now, I can give it, I want to decrypt, I would have liked to decrypt this high noise ciphertext to get a low noise ciphertext, but I don't have the secret key. But I can give the encryption of the secret key as input to this algorithm and homomorphically compute the decryption process. And this will not give me the clear text information. It will give me an encryption of the underlying bit. But what it does is, you can think of it as under the hood, I have this ciphertext, and I kind of wrap it in a new ciphertext with a level similar to a first ciphertext. And inside this outer box, I'm opening the inner box, the inner ciphertext. So I'm decrypting, but under the hood. I'm decrypting with homomorphic operations while never seeing the clear text that's underlying it. So that's the idea of bootstrapping, and this really reduces the noise level from whatever noise the ciphertext has to the noise level that's a fixed noise of computing homomorphically the decryption algorithm. So this sums up the example of homomorphic encryption over the integers, which relies on the assumption of approximate GCD, and the operations are really elementary mathematical operations, just addition and multiplications over the integers. What's actually being used in practice are more advanced mathematical tools, relying on an assumptions called ring learning with errors, and using higher forms of mathematics when the manipulations that we do are either addition and product of matrices or of polynomials. And these schemes are used because they give much more a much better efficiency than the one I showed you. But the core ideas of how we manipulate ciphertext to get operations on the underlying messages and the growth of the noise and the bootstrapping operation, these core ideas are the same, even as the most advanced schemes that are listed here. So let's just sum up what we've seen today. So we had three main goals for biometric data. We wanted to protect the data at all times, to have it encrypted all the time, even while it's being used for standard operations like authentication or identification. And we wanted to have access control so that we can control who can read results of computation, who can read clear text templates and samples. And both these properties were achieved using fully homomorphic encryption. And then we wanted in advance to add some checks and balances. We didn't want to give the secret key to just one entity who will have all the power. We wanted to distribute the power so that no one alone can decide to expose the biometric templates, and that no one alone can decide to prevent access to the biometric templates. And we showed how this can be used using secret sharing and secure computation. And there are many more cryptographic tools, highly interesting, that I didn't have time to cover. I'm listing just a few of them here. And I encourage all of you to read about this topic because it's very interesting results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adi. Are there any questions? And I see there's a question by Hannah.
See it in the chat. Let me open it. I couldn't open it while
During
speaking.
the talk, yes.
This is
It was later answered, so there's no need.
Oh.
I answered,
Okay.
okay. So if we
Good.
see more other questions, how will the data be affected if we encrypt it before transit or during? So this is a question by Alon, and he's asking, what's the relation? You know, there's all kinds of types of encryptions here. We want to encrypt the data during transit, we want to encrypt it during rest, and we want to be encrypted during use. So here, it's a deep question actually, because there are many subtleties. So the simplest answer is, you know, you can, once you enroll the data, once you acquire the template on your, I don't know, your home machine, and you want to send it to some database, you can, on location, on site, encrypt it with fully homomorphic encryption, and then send this to the database, where it will be stored in a form that it's amenable for computing on it subsequently. So this is a simple answer, but it's not really the one we would typically want to use. And the reason is that fully homomorphic encryption has a wide expansion rate. Even if I want to encrypt 1 bit, I usually need to encrypt something that's much, much larger. In the example that we showed in depth here, we need to encrypt a very large integer. And then examples that are used more often in practice, we want to encrypt, say, a big polynomial. So we need to have a vector of coefficients, which usually is really big, something like 10,000 coefficients, 32,000 coefficients, big polynomial. And if you want to do it just for one bit, that's really problematic. So there are all kinds of ways to overcome this question of this expansion. One way to do it is called rate 1 FHE, which are rate 1 homomorphic encryption, which is essentially a way to take your FHE and then condense it to a smaller ciphertext, or put reversely, to allow in your FHE to put many data items in each ciphertext, so that the expansion rate is actually 1. You have the ciphertext is roughly the same size as the information inside it. And this is subtitles, because once it's packed so tightly, you can only do homomorphic additions on it. So there's some tension here between the flexibility of the computation and the efficiency of the storage. So what's done is that we have algorithms that can map from this rate 1 FHE to the standard FHE. So you can put in storage the ciphertext when they are packed, but then when you want to use them, you can kind of open them and decompress them, uncompress them, so that they are in the more in the larger form, but the more expressive, the one you can compute more on. And this is just one example. There are other forms. It's a paper from Vinod et al. From 2011 that proposes to actually save the data in symmetric encryption, like AES, because this is the most compact form, and also it's standardized. It has and it's what's used typically used in practice. And then when you want to use the data, just do compute the homomorphic decryption, but when the secret key that you use is not that of the full homomorphic encryption, but that of AES. And the output will be, it's called this trans-ciphering. It will transfer from an AES ciphertext to an FHE ciphertext. So these are two directions that have been explored in literature of how to achieve both efficiency and the expressivity of the FHE ciphertext. Let's see, 2 questions from Hannah, or 3 questions. Hannah, are both your questions answered?
Yes, thank you.
Good. So are there any more questions?
Yeah, can I ask a question, Lee?
Of course.
Yeah, do you hear me? Yeah.
I do.
Right. Can you say anything about nonlinear operations? Are any of them possible? I want to take a log. I mean, you can always approximate by linear, but if you actually want to compute a nonlinear operation.
So first,
That's my one question, then I have another question. Sorry.
So I'll do them one by one, with your permission. So the nonlinear, what I showed here is not really linear operations, it's any polynomial operations. Because I repeat multiplications and addition many times, so I could compute any polynomial. So what do you do?
I mean like logarithmics or things like of that sort.
So in many situations, you want something that it's not really it's definitely not a low degree polynomial. Maybe you want to compute a ReLU or sigmoid or a sine function, things that are not even continuous necessarily. So you could always approximate them with a polynomial, but the degree of the polynomial is going to be high. So in theory, when I'm just talking about what you can do in polynomial time, you can do a high degree polynomial, be a good approximation, you're fine. But if you want to have concrete good efficiency, usually you don't want to compute things with high degree polynomial. So what's often done in this field, and this is, I gave the example of identification or secure search, the key result is often to take the naive algorithm, what you would do if you didn't care about degrees of polynomial, and tweak the algorithm so that everything is low degree. For example, there was a work from 2016 called CryptoNet. It was the first work that did neural networks on data encrypted FHE. And their solution was, with Perceptron, you have this layer with just the inner product of the weights and the values. This is low degree polynomial. But then you have some activation
Non-linearity.
function. So their activation function was just taking the square of the value. Very simple, at the lowest degree polynomial you can think. The least, it's not linear, but it's just 1 degree higher. And they showed that at least on MNIST data set, they achieve very good prediction results and high throughput, so it really does things very well. Other works often use, the works on both with neural networks and decision trees that where degree 2 wasn't enough. So they do things like Remez polynomials, or maybe even just the MSE approximation for, say, the sign function with decision trees to find a lowish degree polynomial, say degree 7 or degree 15, that is sufficiently good approximation on for the activation function that you need. And typically, it seems that the machine learning is robust enough that low degree approximation works fine on data sets that we test.
Okay, interesting. So you don't design anything specifically for non-linearity. You still stay in the polynomial region.
So sometimes, well, you could, for example, if you want to do with ReLU, you just want to put the threshold, right? You want to know if you're above or below the threshold. So their comparison, I can either do by approximation polynomial, which is what's often done, but I can also do some transition. Instead of having messages that are integers or real numbers, I can transform them to binary representation. And then the comparison is actually a fairly low degree polynomial. The degree depends just on the number of bits. So then the challenge is transforming from one representation to another.
Interesting. Okay, and my other question is more philosophical. Well, I don't know if it's philosophical or it's already here, but what happens with quantum computers and quantum computation? Is everything going to crash?
That's a really good question. So actually, one thing that's really good about this ring LWE or LW in general, that as far as we know, they are secure even post-quantum era. So in contrast to the old like RSA and El-Gamal and all these things that were prior, older crypto that we know how to break with quantum algorithms, these things, they're RLWE based. Despite much work, we have no idea how to solve them faster with quantum computers than with non-quantum.
Interesting. Good.
Yeah.
It's a promising perspective. Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. Okay, thank you. And Daniel wants to ask a question. I don't know if you
Daniel, I didn't notice. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much. I was wondering, when you use a secure multi-party computation, if there's a possibility to add weights to certain keys. I mean, such as if not all the party members agree to decipher, if one vote of another keys can be considered as with more powerful weight, but in certain circumstances or situations, I mean, can you take the term like a national security and then apply it in the algorithm or the in such way that it can be described as an urgent situation that you can override the agreement of all party members, because sometimes you need to use the biometric data because it just needed.
It's fairly flexible in the sense that even with the solution of Shamir secret sharing that we showed how to give points on a polynomial, and first you didn't need all parties, right? You only needed if the polynomial is degree t-1, you only need t points to get the secret. So you have built in some flexibility. Now, say you want some hierarchy, so you have some, I don't know, a Supreme Court judge is supposed to have more power than a policeman in the station. I don't know, just giving an example. You can give few points on the polynomial to this entity that you want to have higher weight in the decision than to those you want to have lower weights. You can even say that someone has a secret key as is, and you trust them not to use it. Say you want the president to have a secret key, and usually they're not supposed to do anything, but it's some extreme occasions they can use it. So there are all kinds of, you can play with these things a lot. Another way, I will not get into much depth because we didn't discuss it in the talk, but there are other forms of other cryptographic tools. For example, this attribute-based encryption is an encryption that you encrypt the value, say I encrypt the secret key, but I encrypt it with respect to some attributes. So it should be attributes that I can test. And the thing is that when the attributes hold, then I can decrypt. And the attribute can say that I have some information from the president and judge and I don't know, some other, or you can say maybe something about the timing or something, but you can think it has to be attributes that I can measure and define mathematically. But your question makes sense and it should be formalized mathematically in a way that I can use these tools.
All right, thank you.
I see Hannah has another question. Go ahead, Hannah.
In the specific scheme you showed for the bit encryption, so at first we had a predetermined P, which was like a key, right? The odd P. And for each message, we chose different Q and O's randomly.
Right.
So in case we have a multi-bit string, when we do it like parallel encryption using that specific scheme, do we use different P's or different Q's, different R's, or how is it done?
So the secret key is fixed. You use it, you generate it once, and now we can use it many, many, many times. But the randomness for the encryption, which is the Q's and the R's, this has to be fresh every time. Think if R was the same, for example, then I could request two ciphertexts, one for B equals 0 and another for B equals 0. And then I could, if they have the same R, I could compute the difference of these values, and I would maybe just a multiple of P. Which if I have two of those with GCD, I can find the secret key. So I have to have a fresh randomness every time I encrypt, otherwise the scheme is insecure.
So that specific scheme can be used for a multi-bit string to encrypt a multi-bit string using a single key, not like an n-linked P, right?
A single key,
linked.
but fresh randomness every time.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a question, but my internet is not so stable. I have a question regarding the bootstrapping algorithm. We said that in order to reduce noise, we have to decrypt the message and then encrypt. But since we can't send the secret key, we have to send the encryption of the secret key, right?
Yeah. So
but then what happens?
We don't really decrypt and then encrypt. Well, this is like a straw man solution. If we had the secret key, we could decrypt and encrypt, but we don't have the secret key. What we do have is an encryption of the secret key, and then the decryption algorithm is just an algorithm. It can be written as a polynomial that does multiplications and additions. And if the algorithm does multiplications and addition, I can compute it using homomorphic multiplication, homomorphic additions. So basically, I take the ciphertext, which is the encryption of the secret key, and the noisy ciphertext that I have, and I manipulate all these values to get some other ciphertext that I don't know what it says, but if I will decrypt it, I will see that it encrypts the same message as the original highly noisy ciphertext, but with lower noise.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? If not, let's take the opportunity to thank Adi once again.
Thank you.
So I'm not going to ask questions because we're going to take 15 minutes break actually 14 minutes break at 3:30 Israel time. Professor Anil Jain will start his talk. So now it's time for everyone else to take a break, go and fill your tea or coffee or water cups and have a quick visit to the loo, and we will see each other in 14 minutes. I'm in the recording. Hi, everyone. Welcome back from the break. It is really a great pleasure and even a greater honor to have Anil Jain joining us. Professor Anil Jain is sort of the founding father of biometrics in academia. You can probably see the list of awards and recognitions that he has received on the website. He's a distinguished professor at Michigan State University, and I think that many of the people that we saw or we will see are actually academic descendants of you, right?
Yeah.
If I remember, is a member of the United States National Academy of Engineering, the Indian National Academy of Engineering, the World Academy of Engineering, the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and the National Academy of Inventors. This is like many recognitions which are all well-deserved. And if I may add, Anil, this is the second time he's speaking in our school. He also spoke in the first school, and it was a great success. And we thank you very much for joining us today, especially given the short notices of everything. So thank you very much, Anil, and we're all looking forward to learn something about fingerprint
Thank you.
recognition.
Actually, this is the third time because during COVID also I spoke once. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Of course.
Good. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be part of this short course, and I'll talk about fingerprint recognition. I got my start in biometrics in 1991 in fingerprints area. Actually, I didn't know anything about fingerprints at that time. The National Security Agency, which is, you probably all have heard of it in some way or the other, said, oh, you guys do good work in image processing, computer vision. We will give you a FPGA board, Field Programmable Gate Array, which was very new at that time. And NSA was funding a startup to build FPGA technology. And the program manager said, we will give you this board, which attaches to a Sun 350 workstation, which is very, very primitive, or is laughing, so he knows that. And we will give you $300,000. Can you find some civilian application of it? That's all they said. Choose some problem and not related to intelligence or defense, some civilian application. So some of you may know, FPGA, it's a reconfigurable processor. It can do both high-level processing, low-level processing. So low-level processing was simple. We were working on image enhancement, which is a local neighborhood operation. So we'll say, yeah, image enhancement on it. And then for high level, we said, well, the stereo or point correspondence is a big problem in computer vision. So that's like a high level operation because you have the whole image involved in it. So we said we will do that. Then I asked my students, I said, what application we will do the image enhancement and point matching? And one of my students said, how about fingerprints? And that's how 33 years ago, we got started in fingerprints. And I have a whole bunch of PhD students who have graduated in fingerprints. And everybody said at that time, Anil, why are you working on fingerprints? Isn't it a solved problem? And I said, no, there are always some new problems emerge, new applications emerge. For example, smartphones. I mean, there were no smartphones at that time with fingerprint. So we are very happy that we are not competing with too many other people, but we maintain our quality and do good work. But going back to that FPGA, we actually showed that point matching or minutia matching, we could do 100 times speed up on FPGA as opposed to Sun 3 workstation. And so that got the attention, and here we are. So I don't know the background of the of the students in the class, but I'll assume you don't know very much about fingerprints. So I'll start from the beginning and then go into the details. So most of you have used fingerprint in one form or the other, whether willingly or you had to do it for border crossing or for national ID card. I believe Israel has a national ID card which requires fingerprints and as well as face. So I think 2 thumbs or 2 forefingers. I think it's 2 forefingers, right? So I looked at that, and Hong Kong has an ID card, smart ID card with 2 thumbprints. And so fingerprints are being used everywhere, and we take it for granted that, oh, this must be a perfect technology. And but it's not. I mean, like any technology, any recognition problem, there are errors, and there are bad things which can happen when error is made using biometrics. So I just wanted to show you that this about 1.2 billion smartphones were shipped in 2023 worldwide, and most of them, smartphones, have fingerprint scanner, not in the form which came out of iPhone 5S, because starting at iPhone 10, Apple switched to face. And do you know the reason why they switched to face? It's because they wanted to get rid of the home button, because they wanted to increase the screen size. So the bezel around the mobile phone, the bezel, I mean this boundary around the screen, they wanted to get rid of it. If you want to get rid of it, then you have to get rid of the home button. And Apple could not build the technology to sense the fingerprint from under the screen. That is, having a fingerprint sensor under the screen. So they switched to face, but that's an expensive option. And no other company, or at least not many companies, have switched to face. And so fingerprint remains the dominant biometric in the mobile phone authentication and unlock and payment. Some people tried iris also, but that didn't take off very much. So when we talk about, can you see the whole screen, or is it just too large? It's okay? Okay. So let me see if I can move this thing below. Okay. So when we talk about fingerprints, we have to go back to the basics, which is friction-rich patterns. So if you look at your skin, most of the skin, everywhere in the skin, there are hairs, except at the palms and at the bottom of your feet. And those are 2 special kinds of places where special skin is present, and it's called the friction-rich patterns. Actually, the study of these patterns on your palms, fingers, and at the bottom of your feet is referred to as dermatoglyphics. Derma means skin, and glyph means carving. So dermatoglyphics means study of these ridged or carved patterns. And when we talk about carving, it's basically ridges and valleys which are interleaved in a regular pattern. So as you can imagine, image texture plays an important role in identifying fingerprints. Now, very few people use footprints. In the United States, in the hospital, for the newborns, footprint is taken. But, that's just a souvenir for the mother. In fact, sometimes they put a thumbprint of the mother along with the footprints. But, you can't imagine a biometric system crossing a border in Israel where you'll have to remove your smelly socks and shoes and provide your footprints. But fingerprints and palm prints are extremely popular. In fact, palm was the first one proposed in India during the British rule in 1850s, where one of the colonels from the British regiment said, oh, he will pay the workers wages based on the palm print. Of course, he didn't know that palm, there were no computers that time. He didn't know how to match the palms, but just taking the palm prints. But then as we progress gradually, palm is a larger surface area, and capturing digitally a palm is more time consuming, and processing a palm image is more time consuming, especially high resolution palm images. So that's where we went to fingers, this fingertip actually. And we have 10 fingertips, counting the palms. So a fusion of the 10 gives you higher accuracy, because we will see each fingertip has a unique pattern. That is, the fingertip on your forefinger pattern is different from the fingertip of the middle finger, and so on. So biometric fusion, which we often talk about, it was already in use in the last century, where you take all the criminal database or the national security database consists of capturing all 10 fingers. The reason? Combination of 10 finger gives you a higher accuracy than just one finger. What happens if one finger has a cut or you have a digit missing? So that's why they take 10 fingerprints. So there are a lot of theories about how fingerprints are formed. Ridge formation starts at 1 or 2 focal points and spreads over the fingertip. Localized ridge units merge to form ridges at about 10 weeks of gestation. And so that means newborns have fingerprints, okay? That's, whether you can recognize them, that's a difficult problem. The recognition problem is mostly acquiring a newborn's fingerprints, but they are there, and I'll show you in the next slide. So the reason why fingerprints are different for identical twins is because fingerprints possess genotype and phenotype properties. So genotype means inheritance from the genetic factors, and phenotype means there's some randomness into it. So yes, related people may have a little bit more similarity. Like my fingerprint may be a little bit more similar to my sibling compared to my fingerprint similarity with Or's fingerprint. But still, that similarity is not strong enough that we cannot be separate. I cannot be separated from my sibling. Okay. So here is a newborn. So we have been interested in recognizing newborns. We received the funding from the Gates Foundation about how to recognize children in Africa and so on. They're interested in polio eradication. That's one of their big projects. But the challenge is, how do we recognize people? Who is this person? People don't carry identity cards, or even if a country issues, they're not maintained, and so on. So here is a 6-hour-old baby. And the place where we were collecting the data was an NGO, nonprofit, a charitable hospital. And we asked their permission, hey, can we fingerprint a newborn's fingerprint? And they allowed us, and this is the fingerprint of a newborn. It has all the characteristics, ridges and valleys and pores and minutia points and the core point, but it is difficult to recognize because of the malleability of the newborn skin. But after 3 to 6 months, it's possible to do recognition, especially if you use a high resolution fingerprint capture device. So here are the characteristics of the fingerprints. The ridge characteristics are unique. Ridge configurations are permanent. Now, there is no scientific proof for it. You have to just, there's a lot of empirical evidence that this is true. Configuration types can be indexed. That is, we will there is a higher level classification which we can impose, and I'll show you. So if we believe that rich characteristics are unique, the current world population is 8.1 billion. And if assuming each one has 10 fingers, then we are talking about 81 billion class recognition problem. It's not a simple problem, right? So that is why this uniqueness and permanence, that is why it has been used for over 125 years in every forensic agency and law enforcement agency in the world. There is a fingerprint bureau. And this persistence and uniqueness is the key. Now remember, faces, there has been a huge progress made in face recognition, but identical twins have similar faces. So right away, in a sense, there's an upper bound on face recognition accuracy, because we know 3 in 1,000 births are of identical twins, and that number has increased over time because the age at which women bear child has gone up, and the use of fertility drugs has increased, and that leads to more twins. So these are the major classes of fingerprints. I mentioned about the types of fingerprints. So these are the 6 major classes on which I have shown the 2 types of singular points. The core point and the delta point. So these are the points of inflection where the rich flow pattern changes. And I think I can collapse these 6 classes into 3, which are called loops, left loop, right loop, and whorls. And they account for 95% of the fingerprints. So if you use a magnifying glass and were to look at your fingertips, you will notice that they are of one of these 3 types. And occasionally you may find an arch. And all the fingers on your 10 fingers on your hand are not necessarily of the same type, in fact, are not likely to be of the same type. So your one finger may be left loop and the other finger may be right loop. So due to the pioneering work of a number of individuals who were working in fingerprints, Herschel, Fowles, Galton, Buketich, and Henry, Scotland Yard was convinced in 1905 that fingerprints could be used to solve crimes. That is, to identify individuals who left the fingerprint behind at a crime scene. And in 1905, actually from 1905 to until 1980, everything was done manually. That is, there were a filing cabinet with reference prints, people who had been convicted. And then when a new case comes, new fingerprint found at a crime scene, the forensic agents, or they are also referred to as fingerprint experts or latent examiners, they would compare the crime scene fingerprint, which is partial and smudgy, with the fingerprints stored in the files. That was a tedious process. So then FBI started, the United States Congress authorized FBI to start collecting fingerprints in 1924. And this is a fingerprint card. This is a standard card probably used by all the agencies worldwide, law enforcement agencies, including Israel. So it has on the top of the card, it has the name and other information about the person. And then you have the 2 rows in the top are called rolled fingerprints. I'm sure some of you have their fingerprints taken, not because you you committed a crime, but because of the national ID or background check and so on. So the officer will hold your finger and roll it from one end to the other. Okay, so that's called a roll print, and that has more surface area. But most of the time at the border crossing and national ID program, the capturing of roll prints is time consuming. So you just do on a scanner, flatbed scanner, four prints from the right hand, 4 prints from the left hand, and the 2 thumbs. So that's what it's showing. 4 prints of the other hand, and 2 thumbprints. So this is referred to as 4-4-2 capture. And what I'm showing on the right side here is the partial print from a crime scene. So in this case, some criminal left a partial print on a bank check. And based on this smudgy fingerprints, I want to recognize who left it. So what this requires is taking this partial fingerprint and matching millions of fingerprints like this in a database. Okay. Now, you have to have some information who might be the likely subject. So in the case of Michigan, the fingerprint database is about 4 million. That is 4 million individuals are in the database. Not that all 4 million are criminals. Criminal database is much smaller. But, school teacher, anybody, public security, bus drivers, anybody who deals with children, their fingerprints are in the database. So this is a very challenging problem. Matching one fingerprints of this type, or roll-to-roll matching, or this is referred to as TP to TP. TP stands for 10-print. So 10-print to 10-print matching is relatively easy. I mean, it has accuracy of 99.9%. So let's say OR is working on some secret project and they want to make sure that OR doesn't have a criminal record. Okay, so they'll capture OR's 10-print and compare it to the database of all the Israeli citizens as an example. And the reason for doing that is because OR could be using an alias name. So you cannot just check against the OR's fingerprint in the database. They want to make sure that this person we are recruiting for some secret project doesn't have a criminal record. So the crime scene evidence means comparing a partial print to 10-print comparison. So the first line, TP to TP comparison, is under control. We still want to improve it because all the time, 10 prints are not of the highest quality. What if you have you do a lot of farm work or you do a lot of brick work, so your fingerprints are sort of not as sharp as they should be. So this is how a fingerprint bureau in the state of Michigan looked like in 1960. I was not around there, but I have visited that bureau in mid-1970s because it used to be right across from our campus. So when I started working in fingerprints or started showing an interest in it, I visited this bureau. So what you see in the filing cabinets is the database, 10-print cards. And they were sorted according to the classification, okay? So Henry system of classification, left loop, right loop, double loop, arch, tinted arch, things like that. And then they would index. So if a suspect's fingerprints come, they will determine its type. It's a combination of all the 10 fingers, and then they will search the database. So this is how they narrowed down the search process because computers were not available. So the first scientific paper on how to compare fingerprints was proposed by Trowding in the journal Nature 60 years ago, okay? And it's quite interesting that people as early as 60 years had an idea of how fingerprints or biometrics could be used. So here he talks about a method by which decentralized automatic identity verification, such as might be desired for credit, banking, or security purposes, can be accomplished. So he's not talking about just law enforcement. He's talking about all these applications of biometrics which we currently use. This is quite amazing. I mean that, smart people can forecast or foresee what's coming in the future. So basically, there is something called minutiae. As I mentioned, we have ridges and valleys, and sometimes these ridges bifurcate, or ridge sometimes abruptly ends. So these are called minutiae points. So this one where bifurcation happens is called ridge bifurcation, and this point is called a ridge ending, okay? So basically, all the manual examination of fingerprints by forensic examiners, as well as all the automated fingerprint identification systems are based on minutiae matching. We have, let's say, 80 minutiae points in one fingerprint, 75 in another one, and we want to make a correspondence between the two sets of points. If we can do half of those point correspondence, you will have a good similarity score. So it's not necessary or it's not required that every point in one fingerprint have a corresponding point in the other fingerprint. Because if your fingers are greasy, you just had a lunch or a hamburger, or you just washed your hand or applied lotion, then all the ridge structures may not be clearly observable. Some minutiae cannot be extracted either manually or automatically, and that's why this is referred to as inexact point matching. So this, I'm quite familiar with it. This is how the first automated fingerprint identification system, which was acquired by Michigan State Police in 1989. Some of you in the class are very young. You may not remember these mainframe computers and these CRT displays, but this is how the life was, okay? And it was extremely slow. And at that time, maybe there were not as many criminals because the 10-print database at that time was only 725,000. And every day they will do about 5,000 searches. And they did not have the capability at that time to do a crime scene partial fingerprint to 10-print search. And the accuracy and the speed of the system was 15,000 comparisons per second. The current systems operate at 10 million comparisons per second. And the FBI 10-print database is one of the largest, which has about 150 million 10 prints. But the granddaddy of all is the India's Aadhaar system, which has 10 prints of 1.5 billion individuals. That's not a forensic database, law enforcement database. That's a civil registration database to issue a 12-digit identification number. In the case of Israel, I think the ID number is 9-digit. The 9th digit is a check digit. But in the case of India, it's a 12-digit Aadhaar number. Aadhaar means foundation. Okay. I think there is a chat here or something. Or can you read it, what it is?
It's a question by Alon from a bit earlier about why do identical twins who share nearly identical DNA have unique fingerprints? But I think that you've answered it.
Yeah, okay.
But I actually have a question. How come the FBI has 150 million 10 prints? Where did they get it?
So first of all, FBI maintains so FBI has the fingerprints from all the states. So it becomes a central repository. Okay. It has database on all the military personnel. I mean, it's not that there are 150 million criminals necessarily. It has a civilian component and a criminal component. But once the fingerprint goes into the database, it never leaves. So over the years, it has accumulated. If a person dies, they don't remove it from the database. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah. So every state in the United States has an AFIS. So there are 50 states. Everyone has AFIS. In fact, some of the larger cities like Detroit, Los Angeles, maybe Houston, they have their own AFIS. Okay. So typically what happens is if a crime is committed in Michigan, it is first searched against the Michigan database. Then they may search it in the neighboring states. And then very serious cases are sent to FBI for investigation. So until 2001, fingerprints were primarily restricted to law enforcement and forensics. And if you told anybody, hey, my fingerprints were taken, they will look at you suspiciously. This guy, stay away from him. He must have committed some crime. It happened to me in 2006 or 7. I was on a scientific board of the Department of Defense, which is called the Defense Science Board. It was like an advisory committee to the Secretary of Defense. So it was a pretty high-level operation. And so first I got the secret clearance, which did not involve checking with my neighbors, how is this guy? But then they decided I need a higher level clearance, what is called CSI, compartmentalized secret intelligence, secret clearance. Then the agent came to my neighborhood and started asking my neighbors about me. And one neighbor got really spooked. He came running to my house and talked to my wife, hey, this guy is asking about your husband, And so before 2001, I mean, that's why when I started in 1991, people are always wondering, why am I working in fingerprint recognition? But unfortunate incident of 9/11 changed everything. This is actually made fingerprints and the field of biometrics more popular. What happened? Okay. So in 2003, based on the mandate by the United States Congress, that we got to do something. And Homeland Security Department was established, and they said, well, we need to keep track of who is entering the country. So they only decided to do the entry system. US airports are not set up for exit system, So they decided to do this for the entry. That means we want to check if the person entering the country has a prior criminal record. Okay. Now, in order to expedite this program, they said, well, we'll just start collecting 2 thumbprints just to get going. And a few years later, they decided, well, 2 fingerprint doesn't give as much information as 10 prints, because if I compare 2 prints of an incoming passenger against the criminal database of FBI, which is based on 10 fingerprints, then the accuracy drops. So later on, they did the 10 print capture at the airport and at the US consulates where the visa is given. And it was sort of the visa waiver countries, which I think Israel may now be part of it, were not subjected to fingerprint capture. So So this is the flatbed scanner. And when you enter the country, so now they're shifting to face, but when you enter the country for the first time, they do capture your fingerprints. And this is done in many, many other countries. So here I'm showing you some other airports, Incheon Airport in Seoul, Mexico immigration, where you see in the Mexico immigration, I mentioned to you about 442 capture, and that's what is going on there. Now we also have the sort of remote ID checks. A customs agent or border inspector captures the fingerprint using a portable device, and then they send it to the central database for comparison. So as the sensing technology improves, they are finding more and more applications. And one of the other research topic is contactless fingerprint capture. You know, maybe this is a result of the COVID, or as a having to capture fingerprint without being too close to the suspect. So use the mobile phone camera to capture the fingerprint and then compare it with the 10-print thing. So this mismatch between the query, which is captured in contactless, and the database, which is based on 10-print SLAP, causes a drop in accuracy. So that's why face gets more traction now, because I can capture face in a covert manner without your knowledge. But then that raises the issue of privacy and the big brother and the tracking. So there are some benefits to each modality, but then there are some disadvantages. So I will show you just some common applications. So I live in a village of Okemos in Michigan, and we have a huge grocery chain called Meyer Supermarket, which is a chain in the Midwest, Michigan, Ohio, Illinois. And for the last 15 or 20 years, the cashiers use fingerprint when the shift changes. Okay, so keep track of who worked from what time to what time. So it's kind of a combination of time and attendance, and also perhaps to keep track of the cash tray, which is in this terminal. And to date, it's being used, same digital persona fingerprint reader, which works very well. It works only for civil application. You just need one finger. You don't need 10 because you're not doing 1 to 100 million comparisons. Below that, this is my university's credit union. It's like a bank. And the bank officers also use the same scanner when they log in, because login using a biometric is more secure than login using password, because if you use password, you may just use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you use a complex password, then you write it down and hide it under the keyboard. So many financial institutions require fingerprint or some other means, mostly fingerprints, to do the login to the servers. Now, this is not being used right now for customers. This is only for the cashiers in the supermarket and the bank officers. When a customer talks to them, they log in to access the account. This is a fingerprint time clock. The fingerprint reader is right here. It's an optical scanner. And this is often used in factories or warehouses, what time the worker came in, what time the worker left. And this is the Disney park. This was actually started in 2005. It has, since then, the picture has been modified, but they're using fingerprint. And this is not for security. This is really because people were sharing tickets. So I buy a whole day pass for $150 or whatever it is now. After half a day, I get tired. I go outside and sell that ticket to somebody else. Okay. And this way, the Disney was losing a lot of money. So he said, well, you know, why not link that ticket to your fingerprint? So here is the fingerprint reader. And actually, this fingerprint reader is a multispectral fingerprint reader made by Lumidyne, which is now HID. And Disney funded they provided the seed money to build this multispectral scanner. So the multispectral scanner means it's not just the surface of the finger, it also goes beneath the skin. And the rich structure which is present on the surface is also present up to few millimeters under the skin. So this, if your finger is dirty or smudgy, I mean, you want to have a minimal reject option. I mean, you want to capture good quality fingerprint and you don't make it user-friendly and convenient. You won't use it if it starts rejecting you. Oh, your fingers are dirty, and clean it. I mean, with several 100,000 people going to Disney Park every day, the throughput is extremely important. Okay. All right. So this is quite interesting. As I was preparing this talk, I just wanted to see what's going on in Israel about fingerprints. And I found this article in Smithsonian magazine about how fingerprints is being used to find out who were the artisans who made ancient pottery or so. And notice here, I hope you can all see this fingerprint pattern here. So it was quite common in ancient days for the potters to put their thumbprint as an impression on the pottery or other artifacts. So people were curious about this ridge structure on their fingers, and they were putting it as a signature without realizing that they are indeed unique or scientifically unique. But they knew somehow that this is an identification mark. So in an unusual collaboration, archaeologists in Israel are working with police to analyze prints left on 5th or 6th century pottery shards. So there is even a name of the police officer from the Forensic Bureau in Israel. So, in fact, for the military application on IEDs, improvised explosive device fragments, often there are some partial fingerprints present, which can be used to identify the suspect. Okay, so now I want to talk about the world's largest biometric system in 2009, and I was involved a little bit in its early stages in terms of advising them about biometrics. In India at that time, in 2009, the number of persons were about 1 billion. Now it's 1.5 billion. And half the people in India at that time, 500 million, had no form of identification. No birth certificate, no driver license, no passport. They were self-employed or working in the farm, so no employer ID cards. And so the government, but there was a lot of fraud associated with it, because any public subsidy the government was giving, I was entitled to it, but my boss will go and muscle me out and get the benefits I was entitled to, get it for himself and his family. So there were subsidized sugar, subsidized cooking oil, things like that. So the purpose here was to give everybody a unique identity, which can be verified 24/7, and which cannot be faked. Okay. So they said the only way to do this is by biometrics. And that's where I came into the picture. So the objective of the program was very simple: issue a 12-digit unique identification number, which is randomly generated. It has no bearing on person's residence and so on. I forget whether Israel's 9-digit ID number. Well, really 8-digit, 9 is the check digit, but that 8 digits have any significance, interpretable significance. But in India, this is a randomly assigned number. So issue a 12-digit UID to Indian residents that can be used to eliminate duplicate and fake identities. And this way, each person has one and only one ID, which they can then use to prove who they are. But you cannot prove yourself just the number. If R gets hold of my 12-digit number, next time he goes to India, he can masquerade as me. At the time of benefit distribution, you must present your 12-digit number and your finger, one finger. Okay, so it's basically a two-factor authentication. You have 12-digit number, which is linked to your finger. And when you specify the 12-digit number and provide your finger, the merchant or the government agency will send it to the central server, Aadhaar server, and then they will look up what is the fingerprint under that 12-digit number. They will compare it, and the output which will be sent to the merchant or to the benefit distribution center will be yes or no. Biometric data never leaves that server. So yes means yes, this number is linked to this fingerprint. That's all. And this server is under a separate entity called Unique Identification Authority of India, which is not shared with any other government agency. It's actually the law issued by the India's parliament, which says that no other entity can have this database of biometric database of this Indian citizens. The only thing this agency will do is to verify and provide an answer yes or no. So this is a very, very important thing, that this database is completely separate from, voter registration, passport, and so on. But they can utilize the service of this agency to establish the identity of a person. So as I mentioned, the enrollment in this database is about 1.4 billion. In fact, it may be more now. It is used for deduplication and authentication. Deduplication means if I went to the enrollment center in Bombay and say, hey, I don't have a Aadhaar number, give me Aadhaar number. But before they will do that, they will capture my biometric data, search the entire database of 1.4 billion, and come back to say, oh, you already reside in this database because you went to someplace else in India to get this number. Or they will say, we can find you in this database, so we will give you a new number. Okay. And currently, this is quite mind-boggling considering Israel has a population of maybe 7 million. Or maybe 10 million. The authentication, there are 80 million authentications done every day. Now, this is quite, and it is growing every year. So what is collected in the India's Aadhaar program? Now remember, separating 1.5 billion people is a lot of work. I mean, you need a lot of information every biometric has a capacity, upper bound on the capacity. We can't just use fingerprints. What happens if the person doesn't have an arm, both the arms? India decided that everybody must be given this 12-digit number, irrespective of if hand is missing or whatever. So they say, okay, we will take all 10 fingerprints, we will capture the 2 irises, and we will capture the face. Remember, in 2009, face was in its infancy in terms of recognition ability, but they were wise people and they captured the face, even though the India's Aadhaar Act says face is not a core biometric. the core biometric is fingerprints and iris, because at that time, face was not very accurate, but they still decided to capture it, which is good. So here I'm just showing you all the biometrics which is captured. You have 10 fingerprints, slap fingerprints. You have the face and the 2 irises. Minimum age for enrollment is 5 years, and re-enrollment happens at age 15. So these enrollment sisters are still in business, and they opened hundreds of thousands of these enrollment centers around the country, in the schools, in the libraries, and so on. Now you can go to a bank and enroll yourself. And the impact of this system was so huge that the cost of the fingerprint scanners, slap scanners, suddenly dropped from several thousand to less than 1,000, because India was buying hundreds of thousands of slap fingerprint scanners. Nobody had ever even come close to buying so many scanners. So this had a huge impact on both improving the system accuracy at large scale, both for iris, face, and fingerprint, as well as the hardware cost. So what happens to deduplication? Just like as I mentioned, I'm a new applicant. I provide my 10 fingerprints, 2 iris and face. So you go to an enrollment center, they will capture this. They have this huge database, enrollment database of 1.5 billion people. Remember, when the search is made against the database, your name or other information is not used. Okay, only the biometric data is used. And we want to find whether there is a duplicate entry in this database. If the person is already enrolled, you just tell him, why you already have a number. Why do you want to get another one? And so, is that any questions at this point? Because I don't want to keep talking if you have some issues. Or any question? Everything is clear?
Yeah, I see everything. I'm monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand, or you can write in the chat. I'm monitoring it.
Right. So in 2009, we conducted a proof of concept, whether the use of 3 biometrics. As I mentioned, at that time, face was not very accurate. So face was not used in this proof of concept. We just said, okay, what is happening with respect to combination of face and combination of 2 iris and 10 fingerprints? And so the green is based on fingerprint, red is based on iris, and here is the fusion. So FPIR and FNIR is false positive identification rate, false negative identification rate. And this was done based on a 40,000 subjects in a subpopulation. And this convinced the authorities that, yeah, fusion is indeed helping us. So this is how the authentication works. If you want to get a subsidized cooking gas, you go to the dealer. He will enter your 12-digit number from your Aadhaar card, and then he will ask you to put any finger, usually right index finger. And then this information, the 12-digit number and the fingerprint, is sent to the Aadhaar server. And instantly, you get a response, yes or no. If it is yes, then you are granted the subsidized cooking gas. And as I said, this is being done now, 80 million authentications every day. Yes, question.
There is a question in the chat by Avner. If 81 million repeats, what happens in 1/4 billion, in 1.4 billion?
Say it again, sorry.
I think the question is, if 81 million repeats, what happened in 1.4 billion?
Well, there are always there are always going to be some repeats in the system because deduplication is never perfect. In biometrics, we can never claim that FPIR and FNIR, or in authentication, false match rate and false non-match rate are going to be 0. Okay. So yes, during the deduplication process, there are some people who are likely to have 2 different Aadhaar numbers. But at the time of authentication, there may be some issue because if well, I don't know. I mean, this is something which we will never know, right? Unless you actually try to enroll some people twice and that's how it does. I mean, how do you determine whether the person is in the database or not? Is you feed in some duplicate identities on purpose and then see what the system response is, right? Yeah, that's a good question. Now, what happens if somebody has very poor quality fingerprints? And that was causing a problem in India because in farmers, they do a lot of manual work and they have, or maids who use a lot of chemicals, they have fingerprints which are of very poor quality. Now, during enrollment, you take 10 fingers. So based on that, you can do deduplication. But during authentication, you're using only 1 finger. Why? Because we want to have a high throughput. We don't want to capture 10 fingerprints at authentication. So that's why now they have started face if the fingerprints do not work. So you can provide 1 finger, there's a backup finger. If 1 finger doesn't work, you use the second finger. That's the reason why Israeli national card has 2 fingers rather than just 1 finger, right? Taking 10 fingers will take too much time and too much storage on the chip in the ID card. So there's always a sort of a compromise which is made. Why is iris not used for authentication? You know, iris is not as convenient to use. So people take more time in enrollment and capture process, and there's a failure to capture rate. So that's why fingerprint is the most predominant biometric for authentication. For deduplication, we take as many things as we can. So there had been a lot of debate in India about the privacy and how can we force people to provide these biometric data. India is a democracy with pretty generally believe that the judiciary is independent. And so finally, this issue was settled in 2018. Aadhaar gives dignity to the marginalized. Dignity to the marginalized outweighs privacy. And that was the rationale under which now. In fact, when I was working on the project in 2008, 2009, we were always worried, will people even come to enroll? You know, do we have to give them incentive? It turned out that the first day the recruitment Aadhaar enrollment center opened up, there were thousands and thousands of people standing in the line because they wanted an identity. They did not have an identity because they could not go to the bank and say, hey, I want to open my account. They say, who are you? You know, a lot of people in India are living under the bridge. They don't even have a permanent address. And the Aadhaar system said, you can bring somebody with you and say, yeah, this guy I know, he has been sleeping under this bridge. I've seen him many times. You don't need to bring any birth certificate or anything. Just need some introducer to tell. And this is the second point is also very important. Enrolled biometric data never leaves Aadhaar server and is never shared with any government or non-government entity. So if you want a SIM card, you need to provide your Aadhaar. If you want to open a bank account, you need an Aadhaar. So there are many services where it's required. So almost everybody living in India has an Aadhaar card. In fact, if you want to go to India for a sabbatical, if you stay 6 months or longer, you are entitled to an Aadhaar card. So it's not restricted to citizens. So how does the fingerprint recognition system work? Let me see. Oh, so I'm already 1 hour. Oh, sorry. So basically, you have a template database, but I think I have already mentioned to you feature extractor. So let me just now go. There has been a huge advances in the fingerprint sensing. This is how many of you may remember how fingerprints were captured. Applied ink to your finger, officer rolls your finger and rolls it, holds your finger and rolls it on a piece of paper. Then came this optical sensor. And I bought this sensor for $2,500 in 1994. It is the size of a brick, okay? Then the capacitive sensor started coming. This sensor is a swipe sensor because silicon was expensive that time. There was a company called TBS, which did a 3D sensor. Sorry, it's moving too fast. This is the slap sensor. This is the Morphos or IDEMIA swipe sensor. So it's like a contactless sensor. The Apple 2014 introduced okay. This is at the payment terminal, you have a biometric on it. Now there are other payment companies which are doing it. And this is what I was mentioning, why Apple shifted from fingerprint to face, because they could not get in-display fingerprint sensor in time. And the Chinese companies, Vivo and others, they all use this. So basically the optical sensor is under the screen. And that's quite a feat to be able to sense fingerprint when you put it on the glass. And so that's what most of the phones are using. Who knows how long Apple will continue with face? They may move to something else. There is some rumor that they may move to palm print. So what is the fingerprint representation, which has been in use for the past more than 120 years since the Scotland Yard adopted? So one is level 1, ridge, flow, and pattern type. Remember, I showed you left loop, right loop, and so on. They're all based on how many cores and deltas there are, okay? And these points of core and delta are the points where the flow pattern has discontinuity, okay? Now, people spend a lot of time in trying to classify a given fingerprint into 4 or 5 of these major classes. We were able to get 95% accuracy, but never 100%, close to 100%. And that's a problem, because if you start indexing fingerprint based on 95% accurate binning algorithm, right away you are putting a bound on your accuracy. So nobody uses the binning anymore, because computing power has become extremely fast. So we don't classify fingerprints anymore. What about the most common features for fingerprint recognition are the minutia points. These are called level 2. And level 3 are more finer details. If you look along the ridges, there are pores equally spaced as well. But from an image processing perspective, extracting these pores, which can be thousands, is computationally very expensive, not very desirable, and for noisy images, not very accurate. So nobody uses level 3. I mean, we did a study for FBI about the use of level 3. Everybody is using the minutia points. But before you can extract the minutia point, you need to be able to clean up the images. And so here is a sensed image. These creases you see could be because of some cuts and bruises or fingerprint being dirty. And then this is the enhanced image using a bank of Gabor filters, which we did in 1999. And this is an algorithm which is still used. So you see here the minutia points extracted from the raw image, which gets a lot of spurious points because there are a lot of discontinuities along these spurious lines. But when you clean it up, you get a more accurate. So this cleaning up operation is extremely essential for fingerprint. And then it's just a question of how do we extract the minutia, simple image processing algorithms. And then around each minutia, we have a descriptor. And the descriptor, so we talked about point correspondence or minutia correspondence, but we also want to have some descriptor or some attribute associated with minutia. And these attributes are of two types. Rich flow-based descriptor, that is in a neighborhood, what are the rich flow patterns? And the second is, in the neighborhood of a minutia, how many other minutia are there? Okay, so this constitutes a descriptor. We have a spatial position of the minutia point. We do an alignment, which is essential. And then once we have done the alignment, we have a correspondence. We count how many correspondence there are, and that determines the similarity score. So here is a query print, here is an enrolled print in the database. We find the rich structure. From the rich structure, we find the minutia. We do the correspondence. So the green lines are indicating the correspondence, and the similarity is 0.9 on a scale of 0 to 1. And then we plot the, in the blue curve is the genuine score distribution. No, sorry, what happened here? Oh, sorry, blue is the imposter score distribution. That is, I compare my finger to R's finger, or my left index finger to my right finger. So, different finger comparison scores are low. Same finger comparison scores are high, but the two curves intersect, and that is where the error occurs. And if you can find a representation so that the overlap is small, that will be good. And then you plot a receiver operating characteristic curve, false accept versus the true accept. So same fingerprint recognition system can be operated at different operating points depending on what is the desired or what is acceptable error rate. Okay, so why is the genuine score distribution flatter compared to the imposter score distribution? Because the finger condition changes from day to day, from hour to hour, from year to year. If your finger is wet, too dry, you apply the lotion, then the fingerprint image will be different, and that explains the flat structure of the large variance. But my student, Josh Engelsma, in 2019 said, well, if face and other modalities seem to have a deep representation, why can't we have a fixed length feature vector? And he came up with a clever method by training the algorithm, a deep network. And fortunately, our collaboration with the Michigan State Police gave us access to a large amount of fingerprint data, because if you just have a few thousand fingerprints, you can't train a CNN, but we had hundreds of thousands of fingerprints, fortunately. So we were able to do that, and we came up with a 192-dimensional embedding, plus 8 other dimensions corresponding to the parameters, transformation parameters. So basically, we came up with a 200-byte fingerprint representation, which is much more concise, which is extremely fast. We could do 10 million comparisons per second using this. And so this was licensed by NEC. And now the way that we proposed and they adopted is that a query fingerprint comes, we want to search it against 100 million fingerprints. It's going to take a lot of time. Why not use the deep print fixed length embedding and get the top candidates? And then we can use the proprietary algorithms which vendors have based on the minutia, and then get a small sorted list which they can use to find the true mate. So here is the state-of-the-art accuracy. For the roll prints and plain prints, accuracy is extremely high. And if you want to get the accuracy number, best source is NIST FPVTE, fingerprint technology evaluation, and even FVC, fingerprint verification competition run by University of Bologna. So true acceptance rate of 99.9%. This is for single finger. If you have 10 fingers, this will get even higher. Okay. But the retrieval plain prints accuracy is extremely high. For the latents, the accuracy is low, and that's understood because of the quality of the latent prints. But as it's important to emphasize, performance depends on the quality of images in the evaluation set. So this is not an absolute, this is just an indication of some operational quality fingerprints, which NIST uses for evaluation. And NIST gets its data from the agencies like Department of State or Homeland Security or the FBI. So this is important. This is the system at Disney installed in 2005. And what is important is usability, throughput, low error rates, day-night operation, robust finger condition, minimize failure to enroll, return on investment, embedded system, template security, match on device. So, accuracy alone is not the driving factor for a biometric system or fingerprint in this case. You may have a 100% accurate system, but there's no customer for it. And that's important to understand. Or you had a question?
Not really mine. Alon asks, do tattoo can potentially interfere with fingerprint recognition?
Sorry, to do what?
Do tattoos can interfere, changing tattooing your fingerprints. Not that I'm aware anybody tattooing his palms.
Or twins
can... Tattoos, not twins, tattoos. Tattooing, if you inking your skin.
Of course. You can do all kinds of things. You remember the movie Minority Report? You can go through some surgical process. But so first of all, let me show you some bad quality images. If you apply henna, which is quite common in India, but also perhaps in Israel or in the Middle East, I know that's quite common. That's a problem. You have somebody working with very poor and so has a very poor quality skin. And here you have a pristine fingerprint, medium quality, and this is where the people who do welding, their fingerprints are it's a mess. It's very difficult to enroll them. But I'm getting to this now. There is an IARPA project called Odin, which we were part of it, myself, Arun, and Xiaoming. And I and my students worked on fingerprint spoof detection. So these are the different material which we use to build the spoofs. That is, you could wear a thin film of fingerprints of somebody else on this. And the question was, can we detect them? And so we built an algorithm called Fingerprint Spoof Buster, where we use both the domain knowledge and the deep network. So we extracted the minutia points in these images, and we looked at small patches near the minutia points. And then we built a deep network to see whether we can distinguish real and spoof. And this, according to IARPA, because they do an independent evaluation, they said our red team has not been able to defeat it. But it's a difficult problem. So which images are spoof and which are real? If you look at this image, it's difficult to tell for somebody who is not very well trained. So here are these 4 images with red borders are spoofs, and one in the middle there, green in the rectangle, is the real. So, but now I would also show you something. Some of you may remember the movie Men in Black, or do you remember seeing it? Or?
Yeah, I nodded my head. Yeah, I
Oh.
saw it. By the way, we're reaching very close to the 9:45 mark.
Okay,
by the
so
way.
I will stop now with this thing, and then so that people can have questions. And you will have slides, so you will have some other stuff on generating synthetic fingerprints and the matching in the encrypted domain and so on. So let's just stop now, and so that people have opportunity to ask questions.
So, first of all, thank you very much. If there are any questions, I know we're a bit over time, but these are actually
Daniel
yeah,
has a question. Daniel has a question.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I wanted to ask you about the excessive use of fingerprints when we consider that deep learning is now a lot more involved in the process. For example, if you take iris recognition or facial recognition, you don't leave traces behind. And even in India, when you consider the Aadhaar program, you leave your fingerprint traces behind on the scanner, and then it can be used as leftovers to recreate synthetically another fingerprint, and I think not much better than this slide you describe now is talking about. I believe there are measures to spoof the system or use presentation attacks. So do you think maybe fingerprints are should we move to better security or switch to another purpose of or measure of biometric detection because of the untraceability and the linkability you can do with them?
So first of all, in the Aadhaar system, it's a two-factor authentication. So you need both the 12-digit number and the fingerprint. Okay. So of course, there can always be a collusion, or somebody puts a gun to your head and say, enter it. But otherwise, if you just lifted a fingerprint, and an Aadhaar system also has a spoof detector. So they can tell whether the finger which is being placed is spoof or not. And it's an attended system. That is, you are going to a merchant and buying something. Of course, there are some unattended system as well, like attendance system. You know, when Aadhaar was introduced, it was being used for attendance as well. And then they realized they don't have enough tables and chairs because some people never showed up earlier. But with the attendance system now. So, you know, every biometric system, given enough resources and enough effort, can spoof the system. Okay. So I'm not going to deny. It's not question of using another modality. If you want, you can have a third factor authentication. If you really, if you want to go into some nuclear facility, you may want to have a much higher thing. If you want to buy something, $1 million of jewelry, you may want to have multiple factors. But what we are talking about is a two-factor authentication here, which works very well. The stakes are very low. And there is most of the time it's an attended operation. And so I'm not sure whether I answered your question or not, but yeah. But spoof detection ability is there in Aadhaar, we know because we provided it to them.
Okay, yeah, just I was wondering if maybe the disadvantage of the leftover of the fingerprints is a problem when you consider linkability between the option of linkability if some person authenticate in other places, while other biometric traits might not leave behind, but I think that our system is more unique and sophisticated than we might have here in Israel and other places. So that's because what worries me about it. Because now I had to enroll my fingerprints in the system, and nobody asked my permission for that, and I just couldn't skip it.
You know, India's media is very strong. If the system did not work, okay, if the system did not work, there will be huge rally. And the fact that it is working for ordinary citizens for the past 15 years or so, more than 15 years, it indicates that yes, it is, while it may not be a foolproof system, which I think we'll never have a foolproof security system, it is acceptable. Not only acceptable, it is very, very desirable, especially for the people who are marginalized, you know. But rich also use it. In fact, there was a big hue and cry. Oh, somebody, oh, if I steal your Aadhaar number, I can access the account. Well, they forget it's a two-factor authentication. They have to have a finger as well as the Aadhaar number.
Right, thank you.
So we have time for one last quick question. And I'm terribly sorry, Hannah, we will have to go with Moshe's question. What is the FTE rate?
Failure to enroll rate for what? For authentication? No, but you know, for enroll. Go ahead, Moshe. Oh,
Moshe,
you're mute. You're mute. Yeah.
For the enrollment of the fingerprint, yes.
Well, frankly, I don't know, but they never reject anybody's Aadhaar. So they take 10 fingers, 10 fingerprints, and if one or two fingers are of very poor quality, they will take your fingerprints anyway. Okay, they will take your two irises and they will take your face. And the enrollment process, if it cannot find the fingerprints, that's fine. But they will still enroll your iris and the face and give you an Aadhaar number.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, let's thank Anil once again. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And everybody else, we will meet next week for two talks. One by Professor Rita Osachi, Margarita Osachi, who is going to talk about deep learning. And as you probably already seen today, deep learning has greatly impacted biometrics, and you just saw it in Anil's talk, that moving from expert knowledge into deep learning features actually improves everything. And the second talk would be by Professor Adam Krzyzewska, who is going to talk about iris recognitions. Iris recognition, sorry, we're both doing the basics of how to do deep learning and a bit more about a new modality. So see you all next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.